Alright guys, now that I am completely finished playing Hollow Knight, I am going to do a boss video, in which this video is going to act as kind of a boss recap of all of my winning runs, but as well a boss ranking. So I'm going to rank bosses in a scale of 5. So 1 being, this is not a boss, shouldn't have ever been a boss. 5 being, this is the greatest boss ever, loved it, whatever. So that's kind of the idea here. Now, there are a few things that you need to remember as I do this. And the first is that I am a noob. I have not played any sort of tactical gaming at all throughout my whole life until I started playing Elden Ring and got into the Dark Souls and now finished with Hollow Knight. So before this, never really played any of these types of games, and I have definitely fallen in love with them. So this is my ranking as somebody who is literally coming into this field for the first time and looking at these bosses from a perspective of someone like me who is going to see these things for the first time, and whether or not they're really anything to worry about, or if they're something that maybe actually kind of detracts from the game a little bit. So anyway, without much further ado, the Vengefly King, your first introduction to Zote. This boss, I don't know. On my ranking, I'm giving it a 2, and that's simply because I didn't even know that this was a boss. It just seemed like a larger enemy with a bit more health. So there really isn't much tactics to it. And that's, I mean, this is the first actual boss of the game, at least what's considered to be a boss. So normally I would rank it a 3, but there was no real introduction. It doesn't give you much indication that you're actually fighting a boss here. So you're not in a boss arena, doors aren't closed off, you can run away if you want to, but it is in fact a boss. It's one that you're fighting. So hence my reason why Vengefly gets a 2. Because as far as bosses go, it's not the worst, but you didn't really know that it was a boss. And it's not much of a boss at that. It's just kind of a bigger enemy. So even without having upgraded Nail, took no time at all to defeat. Anyway, now on to Hornet. Now Hornet is a very fun boss fight, even for a beginning player. Beginning player like me, I enjoyed fighting Hornet. I enjoyed the challenge. I obviously beat her, first try. If you watch the videos, you know I beat her first try. Doesn't mean that that was because of any particular skill on my part. So, as far as bosses go, I would give Hornet probably a 4. Because she is indeed a fun boss, and she's complex enough. It's not easy to beat her. I am lucky. And that's how I beat her. So maybe just a tad bit of, I guess, skill enough to not die instantaneously, but it was mostly down to luck on my part. So definitely she's a great introduction into the boss arena of this game, and really enjoyed it. Really liked the fight. Now, False Knight, this one I liked as a boss. Like, I really did. It's not hard, wasn't very difficult at all, but it is, I guess, challenging to a new player enough that you get the idea of the type of boss battles that you're going to be fighting. And that's why really in this, because it is what I would consider to really be the best introductory boss. You've got the boss arena. It really doesn't give you much opportunity to get out. I know that there's a place there that you can crack and get out of, but I never recognized it in my playthrough. So, but it was plenty of an introduction into the boss field inside this game, and it was by far better than the Vengefly King, which is why I gave it a rank of 3. And really, just because it's a rank of 3 doesn't mean that it's not a good boss. It just means that in the scale of the other bosses in this game, it really, I mean, it doesn't have that same pizzazz, that same quality. So you can't really put it in the same field as these other bosses. So giving it a 3 it feels right to me. And the boss it's fun. It gives an interesting little idea of a small little maggot in a big suit of armor, and kind of gives you a little glimpse into the kind of world that you're delving into. So, and then Gruz's mother. This one is an easy boss, but I still wouldn't put it like the Vengefly. And the only reason for that is because, once again, the Vengefly you really didn't know was a boss. This one you do. It has the announcement, it has its scream, it has its boss arena. It's challenging enough, not super challenging. That's why I gave this one a 3. And then of course after you beat her, you get a little wait, wondering why it's not opening yet, and then you see the rumbling, and it's like, what's going on? And it turns out just to be a little Gruz. So it was kind of a fun little throwback anyway to Alien or something like that. Mantis Lords. Now this one I'm giving a 4. And the only reason I'm giving it a 4 and not a 5 is simply because as far as boss fights go, it is very formulaic. Like, none of these guys had different movesets. They all did the same thing. But this is what really got me hooked on Hollow Knight. Like this battle right here, because they were fast, they were challenging, and yes, even though the moves were stale, it's very hard for a new player to actually get into this fight and actually beat it. And so, yeah, it's like with this one, once you beat the first one, you're kind of wondering, okay, these other ones are just kind of standing up. Are they going to be joining the fight one-on-one, and then all of a sudden, no, they're both coming in, and you're basically fighting that first fight, but with 2 of the Mantis instead of just the one. I thought that perhaps maybe the other ones, at least at the beginning, would join in at like the different phases of the boss fight and have different movesets that you had to try and overcome. But no, they all just kind of came in and they all do the same thing. And like I said, it's fast enough and it's hard enough that like really you're not well prepared for it as a new player. So it's hard. Like I think this one took me like 16 tries or something in order to get through. But it's so much fun that it introduces you to really the fun aspect of the bosses in this game. Like really the satisfying, kind of like the, what do you call it, the prize, the best things about this game that you're going to be experiencing. And this one took me a little while longer because I did not follow Quirrell's advice to upgrade my nail, and I'm sure that a lot of people would. Like they hear, oh, there's somebody down there that will upgrade my nail and make this an easier fight. Sure, but that's not me. I kind of take the challenges when they come at me. There are very few exceptions. A lot of times is only because those exceptions are kind of built into the game, where they make it near to impossible to beat certain things without like having progressed or upgraded. And then of course when you beat the one, then you're like, oh yeah, I've got this, because it's just basically the same as the first phase. Anyway, but yeah, no, this boss fight, tons of fun. Tons and tons of fun, and I would recommend, like, anybody who's playing through Hollow Knight, get to this aspect first before deciding whether or not you want to continue fighting, or if you want to set it aside. Next is the Moloch. This one was very annoying, and the reason why it was annoying is because it has just perfect defense. Like, it has its little spiky things on the side, it shoots stuff out the top, and there really isn't a way to handle it very well. So trying to deal with it as a new player, it was hard, and kind of like the arena was pretty scary. You don't know the opportunities to attack, and it's spitting stuff out at you all the time. So it's really kind of a new way to fight that wasn't introduced in earlier fights. But in the end, it's still a decent boss. I would put this probably at a 3, mostly because it has a lot of health for something that's constantly spewing this orange infection out at you. And so I just I couldn't really get behind it. It is probably one of my least favorite bosses to fight, but it's not the worst boss in the game. So give it a 3 and leave it at that. You know what? I think that I'm actually going to upgrade this to a 3.5, because it's not the same as the False Knight. It is just kind of a little bit more annoying, but it's still a good boss. Just not for me being a new player, you know? And I mean, look at this midair kill. Like, that was a pretty sweet kill for a boss that I really didn't enjoy fighting at all. So, and then I got a mass piece too. The massive moss charger is why I have ones in this thing. Like, its health is too low, its attacks are too predictable, there's really no challenge in it. And so this shouldn't be a boss, it should just be kind of another enemy. And there are enemies that would probably be better placed as the boss here, like those Moss Knights. They were harder than this. The Soul Warrior took me by surprise. He just pops into existence. He is challenging, and he's kind of a fun challenge. Like, not as fun as some of the later bosses, but is definitely a good challenge. He's kind of fun to have here in the middle of this area that you're in. So I'm giving him a 3. I mean, in the end, it'd only take me a few tries to beat him, and his moves are well telegraphed, just need to be quick. The Soul Master. This guy was fun. Like, it was really fun. And his introduction, like, that's a 5 introduction. Like, the introduction itself. You see him rising up in the background, and then he teleports right there to the middle of the screen. And that was awesome. Like, that was such a fun introduction. But, I mean, he is kind of the only one that really does that good introduction. The Brooding Moloch had a similar thing that they were doing, but not as well choreographed as that. It wasn't that difficult, but he was a lot of fun. I mean, I took him down in a couple tries. But yeah, I would say probably for this guy, I'll give him a 4 because that introduction is well worth it. And the boss fight itself is entertaining and fun. And even though, yeah, I don't do too very well like at avoiding damage, there are plenty of occasions here to punish him if you wanted to play it safer. And of course I got the Radiant completion in the God Home, so I was able to beat him without taking damage at all, and it wasn't really that difficult either. But it was, like I said, entertaining. So this guy gets a 4. And I mean, if you want to, you can easily translate them into letter grades, with 5 being S, and then 4 being A, 3 being B, 2 being C, and 1 being D. So tiers, if you'd like. And I mean, that works too. So some of them are kind of like a little bit between tiers, so I don't exactly know where to put them. So I like kind of this numbering grade system anyway. But yeah, one of the things that really annoyed me about some of these bosses was the fact that they just, none of them ever had any health bars. And so, I mean, I took the time and modded it afterwards and did health bars, and I'm doing health bars as I go through God Home. But, ooh, I remember this. Seems like such a long time ago, but yeah, that kind of caught me by surprise when they they put that there and you thought you were done, and then it came down to this. It's like, come on, don't do this. No, once again, it wasn't really a hard segment, and luckily, this guy, when he goes over to the side near a wall, you really don't have to worry about getting hit by those things. They just kind of go. And there you go. It was a good boss. Very enjoyable. Had a lot of fun with it. Dung Defender. Now this guy is a lot of fun. Like he's just a character, you know, like his character is one that you feel like he's entertaining. He's put there not so much to be a super difficult boss fight, but to be one that kind of, what do they call it? Adheres the player to the game. So I'm giving this guy maybe a 3.5, because he is better than just being a boss, but in the end his boss fight is rather straightforward and simple. I mean, it really didn't take me too much to beat him, and I think I got him on the first try. So really, it was a good boss. Like, it was good, just more so average than saying that he was a great boss. And I like the character. Like, the character itself gets a 5. Like, he's a great character, entertaining, adds a lot of character and quality to the game itself. But in the end, his boss fight was not that much. I think that also part of the problem was that a lot of his attacks are very slow and easy to punish. But I like his voice acting, like Doma, 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 all that. Like, I love that stuff. It is comical. So, endearment. That's the word I was looking for. It endears the character to the game. So, like, terms of endearment and stuff like that. And there you go. Dung Defender is gone. I like how he kind of flies up and lands in the back, and then he just kind of scoots in. Fluke Marm. I really didn't like this boss, and I think that the reason being is because it was my first and only real death of the game. Like, this is the only one where I died twice to. I had to come up with some really interesting ways to get me to do enough damage. So, but in general, I would say that this boss is a 2. Not just because I didn't like it, but because beating it is a very simplistic endeavor. Crystal Guardian. This guy, he gave me a little bit of a run for my money just because at that point I just the hitboxes around his attacks were kind of weird, and like he kind of freaked me out for a bit, but he went down too fast. He's a 2. Like, just really, the boss fight is super simple and he goes down super fast. So alright, the actual Soul Warrior, who is technically a boss, I guess. He appears in Godhome, but he doesn't have the same introduction as some of the other bosses. This one was more annoying than fun. I'm gonna say this one's a 3 because he is complicated to a certain extent, but a lot of the complication comes from other mobs and not so much his attack pool. I am one of those people who don't believe that mobs should be in a boss arena. It should just be the boss and yourself, and there are lots of bosses here that prove that that works and can be challenging, most important of which was Nightmare King. But yeah, this guy definitely, he only got his difficulty from having those other mobs. So definitely saying that this guy's a 3. So although the Dream Warriors aren't, I guess, in the strictest form bosses, like they're separate kind of mini-boss type enemies, I'm still ranking them. So just get over it. No. But Zero, he was very easy. And maybe it was because at this point I was getting a bit better at the game. But he took almost no, like I took almost no hits from him. At least until his second phase, I think. Yeah, and then I took one. But I'm giving this guy a 3. Alright, well, I'm gonna give Umu a 4, and I know that's gonna be a little bit controversial because it is so out of place when it comes to the other bosses around, but the boss fight itself was entertaining, the arena was kind of fun, and I really liked having Quirrell there who enabled you to like do the attacks. Umu in Godhome is probably more like a 3, like a 2.5 to 3. But here I'm putting him kind of at a 4. Like, he's a good boss simply because I guess the novelty and the entertainment of this fight is really kind of fun. And so, yeah, it took me a little bit to kind of get used to the attack patterns, but in general, it wasn't so difficult as to make it not fun. And it was definitely novel enough to kind of set it apart from the other bosses that you fight in this game. And I mean, you get to have Quirrell there, so go Quirrell, you know, 100% well worth it as a boss fight. So, and also, you know, looking at it back now as I'm doing this ranking, I realize that this boss took a lot longer than a lot of the other bosses that I fought, especially at this point in the game. But I still stand by it. It's 4 for this particular rendition. Lost Kin is another one that I want to give a 4 to. And I want to do that because the Lost Kin is an entertaining boss. It's much quicker than a lot of the other bosses that you fight in this, at least up to this point in the game. And it's one of those ones that you can really kind of test your mettle against and see how well you do. You know, he's faster, he's got fairly decent rhythm to his attacks, so the fight is fun and entertaining. Even as the Lost Kin, well, I probably said Lost Kin at the beginning, I meant Broken Vessel. But as even as the Lost Kin, it was entertaining, even though it took me a long time to beat. And that's just because the pacing of the fight is really good, and it's a good practice boss to kind of get better with your movements and your attack speeds and the way that you want to attack during openings and stuff like that. So definitely a good boss for all of those reasons, in which case, yeah, I think that it definitely deserves the 4 that it got. Speaking of the Lost Kin, here he is. Speak of the devil and he shall appear. Anyway, but Lost Kin, I am putting at 4 as well. And probably to no surprise if I put his lesser part as a 4 as well. I just don't think, I think that the only big difference between the Lost Kin and the Broken Vessel is the speed of his attacks. Other than that, his attacks are pretty much the same, besides just a few minor differences, and there are more mobs in the arena. And having those mobs in the arena, that's what prevented me from giving him a 5, because he is genuinely probably the most fun version of the Broken Vessel. But with having mobs in the boss arena, you find yourself getting more frustrated at the fact that you die to the mobs and not the boss. You're sitting there fighting the mobs and dying and getting hurt to mobs and not the boss. So that is by far the more frustrating of the things when it comes to mobs in a boss arena, and why I'm not going to give bosses that have mobs in their arena as good a score as they would have otherwise received, simply because it's a cheap way to up the difficulty. Just a very cheap way to up the difficulty. And so, but the boss was really fun. I really enjoyed it and had a lot of fun fighting this guy for the 60 times that I fought him. Enraged Guardian, the higher version of the Crystal Guardian. This one I am giving a 3, and the reason I'm giving him a 3 and not anything higher is simply because, once again, too easy, too simple of a boss, simple moves, simple attack pattern. He did more damage, and that was kind of the only difference between this one and his counterpart, but bosses like this are just too easy to really be given good ratings in a game where so many other bosses are much more technical and challenging. The dual Gruz, they are going to receive the same grade as the single Gruz Mother, which is a 3, and the only reason is because just because you have 2 of them doesn't make them more difficult, at least when it comes to the Gruz Mother. The oblobbles are probably, I'm gonna say, a 2. And I guess the only reason that I put them as 2 is because, once again, they just aren't technically challenging. They have one attack, and once you kill the one, the other one does it faster, but it's still just one attack, and that's all you have to worry about. Eventually you get to the point where you have one, and you do the one attack, and that's it. That's, once you learn to do the one attack, you've got the fight down. The Pale Lurker, the Donald Duck of Hollow Knight. This guy, he deserves a 3 because even though I guess maybe technically he doesn't count as a boss, but he does have the boss shout, and he does kind of explode when you beat him and all that. And it takes time. It takes time to navigate around, and he's technically challenging more in a parkour sense than in an actual like fight technicality sense. So you have to navigate around as the area gets more and more dangerous because of the things that he throws. And so for that particular reason, I'm going to give him a 3. And I mean, I guess in the end, he doesn't actually explode. He just kind of like lies there. But that's more akin to things like what the Gruz Mother does and all that than what normal enemies do. But yeah, just my personal opinion on that. I don't know whether he truly counts as a boss. I'm going to count him as a boss, especially because, like, unlike all of the other enemies that you fight, it does take a lot to beat this guy. He goes around and it's a time-consuming fight, and that time consumption is more akin to what you'd be facing against a boss than what you would be facing against just a normal enemy. Anyway, so, yep, a 3. This is a boss. This is what I would consider a boss. And as a newbie, as a new player to the game, that's kind of how I view it. That's how I come across this. Remember, I've played Nintendo all the way up until I've started these more challenging games. So, to me, coming into this, it is a lot harder than what would even be people who play normally challenging games. You know, I just am a Nintendo casual, not even just a typical casual. Elder Who was a very interesting fight. Beat him on my first try, and his attacks were very easy to, like, walk through or find a center to, but random and kind of sporadic. And so I'm giving this guy probably a more like a 2.5 because he doesn't seem like that much of a boss, but it is definitely challenging enough to be a boss, if not for just the random RNG of where these holes appear between his attacks. And I'm sure that my opinion on this guy may vary wildly from other newbies' experiences or other players' experiences, because we all find certain things to be challenging and certain things to be easy. It's just kind of the way of the way of the game. But for me, it wasn't super challenging. Not as bad as some of the other ones, but also not as challenging for me to consider it as being too much. And that's how I have to go off of it. That's my rating of it. So if you disagree with me, feel free to plead your case in the comments. Like, maybe even seeing it, you'd think that I'd take longer for this one than I normally would have. And you can absolutely tell me that. The Watcher Knights. So the Watcher Knights were challenging, and I'd say that they're challenging for the right reasons, because you do only ever fight 1 to 2 at a time, and their attacks are stale, but in the end, the fact that their attacks are stale allows you to kind of get a good handle on them as a boss, instead of like trying to handle a boss that has a wide variety of moves and then handle mobs that don't have any moves but will still damage you. So that's why this one gets a better rating than many of the other ones that are bosses that have other things in their arena, is simply because these ones have a good balance for the fight, whereas the other ones didn't have that same kind of balance. So I'm gonna give these ones a 3.5 because I liked the fight, it was fun, the pacing was good, and they were challenging enough without being frustratingly challenging. And once again, that frustration would come from not having a really balanced fight. I'm going to say it right now, the collector is a 4. And he's 4 for the same reason that the Dung Defender was a 3.5. And that's because he's a comical character. I like fighting him because he is so comical. The boss fight itself wasn't super technical. He basically just jumps at you and grabs at you and drops stuff on the ceiling. Still more technical than Oblobbles or some of the other ones, or definitely more so than Moss Charger, but he gets a lot of additional points for just being comical, for being an interesting boss, like more so above and beyond than the other bosses that surround him. So even though he's not technical and not necessarily a challenging boss or one that's gonna really put you through your paces, he's a memorable boss. And because he's a memorable boss and the fight itself is not that bad, then I'm giving him a 4. Once again, having the additional mobs always takes down my opinion. So I would have normally given him a higher score, maybe a 4.5 or even possibly a 5 because of how characteristic he is. But because the mobs, I just can't give them that kind of rating. It's just, that type of rating is for bosses that are challenging in and of themselves. And this game does definitely have plenty of bosses like that. No Eyes, I am giving him a 3. And a big reason that I give him a 3, and not entirely lower, because his fight is pretty simple. It's just basically platforming and avoiding these things. Is because his arena is really interesting. Like, you have the statue of him kind of in the background, a little bit creepy. It's dark, you can't see the edges. So whereas the boss fight itself is pretty straightforward and not really anything memorable or to write home about, the arena in which this boss fight occurs is quite memorable. And I'd say that a lot of the bosses inside this game really benefit from having that memorability aspect to their fights. So some of them, like this one, wasn't too difficult for me, even though, once again, I'm a noob. But it was indeed something that stands out in my mind. Like, I actually remember this fight pretty well just because of the environment in which the fight occurred. So, definitely worth a 3, and I don't think I would put it any higher than that, just simply because everything else is so simple about the fight. Okay, and Gorb, he also deserves a 3. And not because his arena is that memorable. It is kind of interesting, but it's not really memorable. It's just him as a character is once again kind of silly. It's a comical character that sticks out in your mind, and his battle is more technically challenging, even though it's basically just dodging these spikes. But the way in which he releases those spikes and the way in which they go across the screen and stuff like that, and their pattern is a bit more difficult to handle than just having things floating from side to side. So definitely a 3, more or less for the same reason that it's memorable and it is a bit more technical than the No Eyes fight. Zod the Mighty is a 1. Like, I get it, it's kind of a joke fight and everything, and how Zod talks up himself throughout the whole game. But there's no technical challenge, there's nothing really here that I would even consider worth noting as a boss fight, so it's a 1. There's no fight here. So Galleon, I'm going to give a 3.5 because he really is like a one-trick pony. All that he has is this bouncing spear. That's kind of it. Not spear, scythe. And whereas that is kind of hard to dodge and stuff, and then he gets the little one, then they're kind of hard to dodge. In general, that's really all there is to this fight. Just these little bouncing orbs that you have to try and avoid while hitting. So I do give it a 3.5 because it is more fun than a lot of the others, but as well, the arena's memorable. So I really liked the Nosk fight, and for that reason I'm giving Nosk a 4.5. Just because, like, his arena is memorable, he's a very memorable fight itself, and the movement, the kind of the fear that it kind of lays into, this very spidery, sinewy type boss here, it's just really a memorable fight. I really enjoy it. I think that its speed lays into the mechanics of the game very well and makes you feel very accomplished when you do finally get through the boss fight. You kind of have to learn a lot of the tactics in order to make sure you can get through without getting hit, especially if you're going to be doing like the radiance side of things. But in the end, the boss itself is memorable, the arena is memorable, and the fight is super fun and fast-paced. So yeah, it deserves a 4.5. And maybe I would give it a 5 because it is one of the more memorable bosses. But I would say that the only thing that keeps it from that is just that I don't like spiders. And you can go ahead and take that however you want. You can say that that's truly a 5 and just my own personal preferences. But this thing gives me nightmares. So doesn't get as high a rating as those other bosses that are good and technical that don't give me nightmares. Marmu was a fun fight, but not much of a fight. Sure, it did take me a couple times because his bouncing is kind of interesting or whatnot, but really, I'm gonna call this a 1.5. It stands out among the other ones, but not by a whole lot. Like, again, you're kind of the best of the worst here. You know, it just doesn't seem like it should be much of a boss, or at least a boss type fight inside this game. But in the end, it was fun, and I enjoyed it, and the character is cute, so I can't give it just a 1. Hornet Sentinel deserves a 4. This is a really great boss fight. It's very fast paced, and even though I think I beat this in one turn, or one attempt, it was truly intriguing fight. It was challenging, it was fast-paced, the arena is memorable, and that's kind of the things that I look for here. The music is also kind of nice, but I wasn't paying much attention to the music while I was fighting this. It was just kind of really fast-paced. And so I had a lot of fun fighting Hornet, and really definitely deserves its place here. Now, I'm going to say that Hive Knight is probably worth about a 3. And that's not because the arena isn't memorable, because it absolutely is. Like in the middle of this hive, it's a beautiful arena. But it's that the boss itself was just very boss-like. It's kind of what you would expect for a boss in this game. So there are a lot of really good and technical and interesting fights that kind of get better praise, but Hive Knight it's just kind of like what you would consider if this was more of a basic game and not really a high challenge game. The Traitor Lord, I am also going to give a 3, and one of the reasons for that is, number one, the arena always spawns with more of these things, and then I didn't want this helper, but this helper decided to help me anyway. And I think that one of my biggest problems with the Traitor Lord is just exactly the same with the Hive Knight, is that it felt like a common boss, like what you would expect a boss in this game to be like, if it wasn't just a super high technical hard fight. The only hard thing about this boss is that it deals 2 masks of damage. If it didn't deal 2 masks of damage, I really wouldn't have had much trouble with it. And again, me being a noob, then I have to really take into consideration how much technical acumen goes into actually beating these guys. And this one, it didn't take too much. It was fun fight, and the arena is interesting. I wouldn't really call it memorable, especially because it takes after a lot of the other scenery in the game, which is more memorable in general. But in the end, yeah, about a 3. 3 seems good to me. Alright, God Tamer. God Tamer is a very solid 4. And the only reason why it's getting that high, like, honestly, I was considering giving it like a 3 or 3.5. But the reason that I gave it that high is because when you get good at this particular boss fight, it is probably one of the most satisfying things to do the Radiant on. Like, really super duper satisfying. And here you see me not doing very well, but on the Radiant one, where you can't take a single hit of damage, then I annihilated it, and it was very satisfying. So that level of satisfaction, combined with the fact that this is kind of a coliseum and really kind of an interesting or intriguing arena for it, then yeah, I'd say that this deserves a solid 4, and mostly because of the Radiance fight, not necessarily because of this particular fight when you first face it in the game. Now, this is once again one of those fights that I'm going to rate a bit higher just because of my subjective opinion on how fun it was. Soul Tyrant, I'm going to rate a 4, and the reason is because for me, this fight was fun. The fight is technical. The way in which the Soul Master came into the arena when you first fought him was definitely, it was creepy, it was mood setting, it was really interesting, very memorable, and the Soul Tyrant is exactly like Soul Master, just a little bit faster, and the attacks are just changed up ever so slightly. So I really enjoyed this fight. It was technical enough to be really a lot of fun to learn, and it was also very just memorable in general. So a very solid 4 for me. One of the things that I think that Hollow Knight did super well, especially in this 2D Souls-like environment, is it found a good way to make traversal and movement very satisfying and exciting. It has good weight to it. It has good lift. When you jump how you feel you should jump. When you swing your sword and you bounce back, you feel like that's accurate and that's correct. And it creates for a very satisfying movement base. And really quite enjoyable to have that kind of those kind of movement options in a 2D platforming, I guess Souls-like, boss rush, whatever you would consider this. And I think that part of the reason that I am so drawn to it is simply because it kind of like, I'm used to Mario, I'm used to The Legend of Zelda, but like as far as platformers go, that's really Mario, Yoshi's Island, stuff like that. And their movement options are very straightforward. You can run, you can jump, and you can jump off of things and whatnot, but that's about it. And so when you have something like this, which has those same basic movements, but expands on it to the extent where it actually feels so right in the environment in which it's set, you can't help but love the game. Like, you just really can't help but love it. It really was done so well and so great. The White Defender, although I did give the Dung Defender a 3.5, I'm going to give the White Defender a 3. And part of the reason for that is because this doesn't feel like its own separate fight. It just feels a lot like a reskin, and you know, maybe I've rated some of the other like reskins a little bit differently. But this one really didn't hold very much inside my mind. Like, not anything more than, oh, I'm fighting the Dung Defender again. Like, I didn't even realize that his attacks were faster or hitting harder. To me, it just seemed like I was fighting the Dung Defender with a different suit of armor. And so, for that reason, I'm giving it a 3. Just because it seems like it's reused, and I know I didn't do any of the more extended fights with it to get higher damage and whatnot, but I feel like even if I did do that, then I would rate it the same. Markarth was a good fight. Really, it was. I enjoyed the fight. It was challenging. There was a lot of technical aspect to it. The arena was a bit bland. Kind of in an interesting place, but in general, kind of bland. And I think that the problem with this was not so much that it was challenging because it was technical. It was just more challenging because there was so much stuff going on the screen. And because of that, I'm going to give this one a 3. I was considering giving it a 3.5 or a 4. It's just a problem of the challenge coming from just too much stuff going on. Now, I really did enjoy the failed champion fight, especially learning to do it, because it is far more challenging than its counterpart. Far more technical, and it is very satisfying to learn the movements necessary to avoid getting hit enough so that you can actually beat the boss. And for that reason, I'm giving this one a 4. And it's really mostly because the satisfaction that you derive from learning to beat this thing, who's a lot faster, hits a lot harder, and its moveset is diversified enough that it is actually a lot of fun to fight and refight, and you do actually derive a lot of satisfaction from beating it. Then in general, I think that this actually deserves a 4, even though that first one, it was a boss, but it was probably not the best version of it. And I think that it was important for it to be there, but this one was such a good take away from it that it really did feel like pretty much a new fight. Gorgeous, passionate, beautiful, terrifying, powerful Grey Prince Zote is a very interesting boss fight. I will give this one a 3.5 because at its base, I know that you can challenge him like, I don't know how many, 10 times or whatnot. At its base, it's not the worst fight. It feels like a boss. That, once again, I've made this comment over a few of the bosses so far, is the fact that they feel like they belong in the game. And they feel like if you were playing this game and it wasn't going to be a super technical challenge or whatnot, then these would be the bosses that you'd be fighting. And so in a game where the bosses really are memorable, a lot of them, and are truly technically challenging and everything, then he kind of stands out as being super average of a boss. So in the end, really that's all I can really say for him. That's what I can give him. Troop Master Grimm is a 4.5. Very solidly a 4.5. And he just... and I think that the reason that I feel that way is because his fight has just the trifecta of greatness. Has a really interesting arena, not one I'd consider super memorable, but it has a really interesting arena. The boss fight is technical for what it is. Of course, you face him a little bit further along and it's harder, but his moveset is quick and sporadic. It is satisfying to when you do beat him. I don't think it took me too long to beat him, but it was one of those fights that I definitely remember, and I think that this game is well defined for this fight. Like, this fight is kind of what makes this game stand out. Not as much as his later form, as we'll get into, but as far as like reasons I would play this game again, this fight is definitely one of them. And really the music, the movement, just everything about this is so memorable and so distinct that it really is meriting the 4.5 And the only reason it doesn't get the 5 is just because its later version is even better. So like I said, Nightmare King Grim for me is what defined this game as a great game for me. This one is a 5.5. This is S+. This is absolutely by far the best fight in this game. It is memorable. Like, just this entry is memorable. The background of the beating nightmare heart and all of these creepy masked circus performers. The fight is super technical and difficult. It took me over 100 tries to actually beat this boss. But once you beat it, it's super satisfying, and it doesn't feel like a chore to go through and fight the boss that many times. I think the only reason it took me so many times is because I beat this boss after I did the Path of Pain, so my fingers were really hurting by that point. But in the end, really everything about this boss, the music, the environment, the technical challenge, the speed, the pacing, just everything about this boss is a perfect boss for what they were going for in this game, for it to be a technical, challenging Souls-like in a 2D platformer. Really, honestly, it is defining of this game. If somebody were to ask me, what boss would you consider to be the greatest in the Hollow Knight game? It would be Nightmare King Grim by a mile and above everything else. Even the last boss of the game can't hold a candle to Nightmare King Grim as far as its amazingness goes. And for that reason, it is my best in show. Like, absolutely wonderful fight. Everything about it, absolutely wonderful. And if you are looking for a great challenge and a wonderful game that satisfies so many needs as far as like environment, challenge, technicality, get this game and get to Nightmare King Grim, because you will not be disappointed. You will not be dissatisfied. So, the Nailmaster Brothers, I am going to give a 3. And it's just because even among the other bosses that are actually in the game, They don't really stand out as being overly difficult, challenging. Like, their fight isn't entirely memorable, especially because the arena that they're in is used by every single boss in the God Home arenas. So it's kind of like there's nothing really that stands out about their fight. They seem more like the Watcher Knights, just less of them. I do like the fact that you can parry some of their attacks and all that, but really, in general, I didn't find these fights to be super challenging. The only real challenge was the fact that they came at the end of a gauntlet of other bosses. So, really, it's just worth a 3 in my book. It's not bad, it's just not entirely memorable. I think that Paintmaster Show was really, he deserves more praise than his brothers. So I'm giving him a 3.5. And once again, he suffers a lot from the same things that his brothers do, but he is faster. His attacks are more interesting and flashy. It's more of a memorable fight than his brothers, but it does still suffer from being too simple, and kind of like most of the challenges is because it sits at the end of kind of like just a gauntlet of other bosses. So there's not much that separates him from other bosses that you'd be fighting normally inside the game, which may be good bosses, but that just seem kind of like normal bosses. Great Nail Sage Sly is also a 3.5, and once again, it's not that his fight wasn't technical and challenging, or fun, or whatnot, but it suffers from being held in an arena that isn't really that memorable, and as well, like the fight itself is more challenging because of the immense speed at which it takes place. It makes it very difficult to react to. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. Like, it does make the fight more, I guess, more technically interesting. But it just really was kind of out of place with having it be, once again, at the end of a gauntlet of other enemies. So that's really where these ones suffer, is the fact that they kind of changed their AI and the challenge to be really offset by the fact that it's at the end of an already long gauntlet of other bosses. All right, the Hollow Knight. I'm gonna give this one a 4, and I like the fight. I really do. This is a really interesting, intriguing fight, and a very kind of a bland arena, but the history of the arena is super interesting. Anyway, getting to this fight, it does feel like an end boss. It feels exactly the way that an end boss should, and exactly the way that I would imagine an end boss to be in this game. Once again, sometimes I do give off points. I do take off points just because something feels like a boss you would be facing in the game anyway, even if it wasn't super technical or challenging. And that does seem to be the case here, even though he is very technical. I just think that the way that they built up the knight throughout the game, and it kind of like the way in which you're introduced to him, is well worth the payoff. You know, it builds it up, and this is what you want to see. It's not just what you expect to see, it's what you want to see. And this guy was great. Like, as far as a last boss goes, is exactly what I wanted to fight. So maybe not as defining as Nightmare King Grim, but definitely what I wanted for a final boss of this game. I actually think that the Radiance being a secret boss is a perfect secret boss. I'm giving this one a 5, and I think it deserves it mostly because, number one, the arena is memorable. It's a very interesting looking arena. You go and you face the sun, and then the sun suddenly expands its wings and you realize that it's actually a boss that you're going to be fighting. And then it comes in and the boss is intimidating, it's large. The look of the boss is very interesting. And the fight itself is fairly fast-paced, fairly challenging. I've actually been very much enjoying the attempts at trying to get through to the absolute radiance, which I know exists because now that I finished the game, I've actually been looking online at how other people have done in this game. So, but one of the things that I am working for is for that absolute radiance. But as far as the secret boss goes, this one is challenging. There's a lot of stuff going on, but none of it feels unfair. None of it feels like the purpose of the fight is this unfair just spam of stuff on screen like some of the other bosses did. And so this one really did hit a good spot for me as far as exactly what I would like to see in a secret boss. And even then, it kind of blew my expectations out of the water as to kind of like a true ending type boss or true ending fight. And so I really enjoyed this. I think that as far as the ending of the game goes, it is the perfect ending of the game, and it wraps things up pretty nicely for me and really did kind of seal the deal of Hollow Knight being one of my absolute favorite games now. For those of you who would like to see it laid out graphically, here's the tier list and exactly where I'd put them in order from S to F, but as well in order of how much I liked them at the beginning of each of their rankings to how much I didn't like them to the end. Thank you all so much for watching this with me, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it, enjoyed my ranking, just kind of based off how a noob would perceive these things, because I am nothing if not a noob at these games. You can go ahead and disagree with the rankings that I gave them, and feel free to plead your case inside the comment section if you'd like to. I really enjoy hearing it. I like responding to people who engage with me in my channel, and I really want this to be a good place where people can bring out their ideas and we can all talk about it, and it can be really kind of just a fun place to be. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for joining me on this ranking, and if you like this, make sure that you like and subscribe, and I'll do more of these in the future. I really appreciate everything that you guys do for me. Have a great day.